Hi, everyone. My name is Roxy, and I am the Visitor Experience and Outreach Coordinator at the Latimer House Museum. Tonight's topic is Exploring Hidden African American History, William Voris Site Excavation. For those who cannot see me, I'm an East Asian woman with short black hair and an orange top, and I'm joined by our speaker tonight, Sara Mascia. We want to start with acknowledging the land that the museum is on. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hopes of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We're on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here tonight. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. We'll be sharing a few links now in the chat for more information about the Lenape people. Yeah, so we can see that. And before I continue, yes, so we have also turned on live captioning, so now you can actually see what I'm saying, so I apologize for that delay. The Latimer House Museum presents Exploring Hidden African American History in partnership with the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy. This is a series of virtual presentations on 19th century free Black communities in the New York region. The series accompanies the recent excavation of archaeological sites associated with William Voris, an African-American entrepreneur in the 19th century, which are located on the grounds of the Meeting House in Rye, New York. And we'll hear from archaeologist Dr. Sara Mascia tonight. I would also like to take a minute to introduce our museum. As you can see in my background, this is how the museum looks like in spring. The Latimer House Museum was the home to Black inventor Louis Latimer from 1903 to 1928 in Flushing, Queens. He contributed to modern technologies, including the early elevator system, bathrooms in railroad cars, the telephone, and most notably, the carbon filament light bulb. Our partnering organization is the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy. They are an all-volunteer nonprofit in Rye, New York. And I'm just going to take a minute to share my screen here so you can see. This is how the Meeting House looks like. And along with that, the organization is dedicated to preserving the Bird Homestead, Rye Meeting House, and the Forest Getney archaeological site, 3 adjoining historic properties located on the banks of the Blind Brook Estuary, while producing educational programs on history and ecology for the public. The Conservancy has received statewide awards for excellence in historic preservation and excellence in education. This program is funded in part by Humanities New York. And after this introduction, we will hear a presentation by Dr. Sara Mascia, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions you would like Sara to answer, please feel free to share them in the Q&A function. We will likely be able to get to 3 to 5 questions depending on the time. And please feel free to comment, share your thoughts in the chat as the presentation goes. Without further ado, our speaker tonight is Sara Mascia. Dr. Sara Mascia began working with the cultural resources firm Historical Perspectives in 1994 and became a vice president in 2003. She has been the primary author for numerous cultural resource reports in the tri-state area, and her projects have taken her to a full range of urban, suburban, and rural sites. Although her specialty is in historical archaeology, Dr. Mascia has experience with both pre-contact and historical investigations, as well as architectural analysis. She also has extensive experience with the identification and conservation of historical artifacts. In 1994, the Register of Professional Archaeology certified Dr. Mascia in field archaeology laboratory analysis and documentary research. Dr. Mascia currently serves as the treasurer of the Society for Historical Archaeology and is on the board of the Council for Northeast Historical Archaeology. In her local community, she is the executive director of the Historical Society, serving Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown. In this role, she has created numerous museums exhibits, generated research catalogs, and established public educational programs. And with that, I'll pass it on to Sara.
That was a mouthful. Thank you, Roxy. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to go right to sharing my screen and getting the PowerPoint started. Oops. Okay, there it is. Okay, good. I'm assuming everybody can see it. Yes, Roxy?
Oh, did you share your screen?
Did it not come up?
Let me just make sure to.
Let me try it again.
Yeah, I don't think they see it in the.
Okay, we'll try it again one more time.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, it is
go.
Working now. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for the presentation about the Voris site and the excavation that was conducted for the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy during the summer. This initial archaeological exploration was funded by Humanities New York and private donations. I would also like to express my thanks to the Latimer House Museum for hosting us this evening. My association with this project began in 2011 when I worked on the historic structures report for the Bird Homestead, as well as the archaeological testing around the foundation of the Rye Meeting House that same year. I was intrigued by the lot between the two historic sites and spoke with Ann Stillman, who at the time represented the Committee to Save the Bird Homestead. Ann mentioned that this site was once the location of a house owned by an African-American resident of Rye named William Voris. After archaeological testing was conducted at the Meeting House, my team also conducted testing around the Bird Homestead in 2015 and a large outbuilding at the Bird Homestead in 2021. Throughout those years, we discussed several potential projects for the Voris site, and Anne worked diligently on securing a grant that would enable us to conduct an archaeological investigation. This year, she was able to secure the funding for an 8-day excavation working with community volunteers to attempt to find evidence of the 19th century Voris occupation of the site. Before I go into details about the field project, I want to share some of the historical background with you. 5 years ago, the Committee to Save the Bird Homestead hired an historian to conduct documentary research on the site. They also had subsurface ground penetrating radar study completed the same year. Reviewing the historical research report gives part of the story of William Voris and his life in Rye, but we can see that there are some parts of the story that are missing from the documentary record. Some early documents, for example, census records, are specifically identified with a primary head of household and not with an individual. As a result, the 2017 report indicates that Voris was not in Rye until 1840. However, that assumption is only because the earliest document that specifies or specifically identifies Voris as living there dates from 1840. In addition, some of the ambiguity might be due to the phonetic spelling of the Voris's name on legal documents. Different spellings include Voris, Voris, Varis, Vorhis, Voorhees, Voorhees again, and all the way down to Van Voris, to name a few. A brief review of the historic documents suggests that William Voris was born in either New York or New Jersey. There has been some speculation that he may have been born enslaved or born to an enslaved woman. If William was born in New York, it is possible that he was born to a woman who was enslaved. New York had passed the act for the gradual abolition of slavery, with any children born to an enslaved woman after July 4th, 1799 declared legally free, but only after they attained the age of 25 for women and 28 for men. Research found that there are several Voorhees families in New York City and the Hudson River Valley, but no birth record of William has been found to date. If he was born in New Jersey, he faced a similar fate if he was born to an enslaved woman. 5 years after New York's law was passed, New Jersey also passed legislation that provided for the gradual emancipation of slaves. On February 15, 1804, around the time of William's estimated birth date, the gradual abolition of slavery law, an act that delayed the end of slavery in the state of New Jersey for decades, allowed for the children of enslaved Blacks born after July 4th of that year to be free, but only after they attained the age of 21 for women and 25 for men. As a result, in some townships in New Jersey, there are records of children born to enslaved women that were established to keep track of these children in the state. There are several Voorhees families living in New Jersey at the time, but no early record of William has been found to date. So future research into the available birth records of the enslaved in New Jersey might provide some more information on the fact of whether he was born there or not. Several documents do provide clues about William Voris's life in Rye, including federal census records, land deeds, tax records, and historic maps. The earliest to date is the 1840 federal census. When William Voris was enumerated on that census for that year, he was identified as the head of household of 3 individuals living in the Milton neighborhood: a Black male between the ages of 36 and 55, a Black male between the ages of 10 and 24, and a Black female between the ages of 24 and 36. The following year, Voris is listed as purchasing property in this neighborhood. On December 15, 1841, Elisha and Harriet Halstead sold a lot of land to William Voris for the sum of $475. The sale included a parcel of land and a salt meadow on the west side of the road. And there is a very detailed description. Beginning at the road and joining the land of Alfred Montrose, then westerly by the land of Montrose 15 yards to the mill pond, southerly by the mill pond 5 yards to the land of Elisha Halstead, and then easterly by the land of a Halstead about 17 rods till it comes to the road, and then northerly again by said road to the land of Alfred Montrose, basically a large rectangle, the place beginning and ending of the description, with 1/4 and 1/2 an acre, or basically 3/4 of an acre, that he purchased. The 1850 census is the first one that enumerates all of the individuals in a household. This census identifies William Voris as a 39-year-old peddler who lives with his wife, Jane, and Benjamin Sutton, a 14-year-old male who might have been a relative or perhaps an unidentified apprentice or laborer who worked with him. The census further indicates that William's real estate was valued at $1,000 by that date. The 1860 census enumerates William as a 49-year-old laborer who was born in New Jersey. It's very difficult to see, but it is on that right side. His wife, Jane, is enumerated as a 50-year-old woman also born in New Jersey. This census indicates that William's real estate was now valued at $500 and his personal estate was valued at $100. The 1862 to 63 tax assessment for Rye includes William Voris and then Henry Voris, who was his son. Both had retail liquor licenses and the amount of tax assessed for them was $20. The 1868 Atlas of New York City and vicinity is the only depiction where Voris is identified with the specific property in Milton. This map shows the property on the west side of the road between the Gedney and Boughton residential lots. 2 structures are depicted on the parcel. The 1870 federal census contains a wealth of information about Voris and the activities on his property. Voris is now listed as 70 years old, and he is enumerated along with his wife, Jane, who is 65 years old, and 6 additional individuals. William is described as a saloon keeper, and his wife is listed as keeping house. Both are identified as being born in New York, and the value of William's real estate is now $4,000, and his personal estate was $1,500. So he's definitely moving up. The other individuals enumerated include 32-year-old John Voris, who was listed as a boatman, and then 96-year-old Martha Voris, who surprisingly had no occupation listed. 3 employees, Abraham Appleby, Mary Brown, and Jane Brown, were enumerated as a waiter and waitresses respectively. The final individual listed was a 6-year-old William Brown, likely the child of Mary or Jane. The next record for Voris is his headstone. It's a type of document that often provides information that those who bury the deceased believe to be the most accurate at the time. William's headstone reads, William Voris died November 16th, 1872, aged 67 years and 8 months. Blessed are the dead that die in the Lord. So I do want to point out that was exactly 150 years ago today that he passed away. So I feel privileged to honor his history tonight. When William died, he did not leave a will. And over the next several years, legal documents were filed to settle his estate, multiple legal documents. The review of these documents provided information about the family, the appointment of Henry Voris as his estate administrator, the confirmation that Henry and Jane were his only heirs and Henry was his son, the indication that Jane could not write as she put her mark on some of the documents, that William's estate appears to have been inventoried by his son and the details presented to the court. And part of the inventory also indicates that Jane received specific items from his estate that were exempt from appraisal. These kind of documents, inventories, are particularly helpful to archaeologists because they do show what kind of materials you may be finding on a site when you're excavating it. Now, one of the documents also indicates that Jane Voris actually died August 1875, before the estate was finally settled in 1877. Now, Voris's property was mortgaged, and another one of the documents that to settle this estate indicates that John and William Gedney, who were holding the mortgage, took over the property in 1877. So after the foreclosure, William Gedney actually took over the Voris parcel as shown on this 1881 map. He's directly in the center below the bird property. So we do know that William did not live there. He actually lived elsewhere in Rye. Following John Gedney's death, and John's house was to the south of the Voris property, Joseph Park also bought that property in 1881. So he's shown there as just south of William Gedney. The following year, William Gedney sold the former Voris parcel to Joseph Park in 1882, and sometime after that, the buildings were raised on the property. This map from 1914 depicts the empty combined Gedney and Voris parcel, which was sold by Joseph Park's son Hobart to Henry Bird the following year after this in 1915. This year, that's the property. This year, the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy was awarded funding for a community archaeological project. This type of volunteer-driven program provides a mechanism for developing community values through increased pride and sense of place. In addition, the project also provides an opportunity for a community to better understand its history. For this program, there were over 12 volunteers, some for only a limited number of days, and others who attended every day. Some of the photographs used in this presentation were taken by 2 of the volunteers for this program, Stephanie Victor and Jessica Drupen. For the excavation, myself and my assistant, Liz Iberd, from the firm I work for, Historical Perspectives, focused on some of the anomalies that were found in the GPR study. I know this looks like a bunch of like a wonderful modern art project, but it actually is a ground penetrating radar project. And the 2 stars show areas where there are anomalies and that are, show up on the left side, which is the west side, is a lot of light colored or white color. which shows that there's a lot of bounce back as the radar is penetrating the ground. On the right side, not where it's blue, but up above where it's green on the east side, in that area up above the star is, and down below where the other green and red are, another very busy area. So those are some of the areas we decided to start looking at. To do this, we started by locating that original datum that was used in 2017 and reset the grid on the exact same lines. Looking at the data from the report, we set up 9 excavation units in both the highlighted areas as well as some of the locations where the maps indicated that Voris buildings once stood. During the overall examination of the site, as well as the location, as well as in the location of the eastern anomaly, a significant amount of architectural demolition debris was noted. Those are the 2 anomalies. Here is one of the units that you can see a lot of that architectural demolition debris. There were a lot of bricks, a lot of concrete, and a lot of metal fragments. Now, the examination of the debris reminded me that a lot of debris was once present at the is present in the location of the Bird Homestead outbuilding and the berm that was located behind the house along the water. The history behind the construction of the debris, and all the debris was that Henry Bird used the demolition debris from a local school to create the berm. At the time of the berm's construction, it appears that they likely stockpiled the debris on the empty lot next door, and it was eventually spread across the site and concentrated in a few low-lying areas. When I compared the bricks, the names on the bricks to the names on the bricks that we had on the site, they were exactly the same. So I do think that this is the exact same material for both properties. To the south of the east, we actually found what appears to be a living yard surface. And what I mean by that is this is a yard surface that is undisturbed underneath the original brick that was discovered, that very surface brick. It appears to be undisturbed from the time period of the 19th century. There's excavation found only a small fragmentary artifacts, typically called yard scatter because they were stepped on and scattered about the yard. And this small amount of artifacts recovered from this unit during screening date to the mid-19th century. Excavation Unit 3 was placed in the location of the largest anomaly on the west side of the grid, where that white area was shown on the map. In this location, the volunteers found additional debris and disturbance, including possible remnants of an animal burrow. The artifacts spanned in this unit from the pre-contact period all the way through the 20th century. Several large stones that might have been associated with the foundation of the structure were also noted at the base. As a result, Excavation Unit 5 was placed in the approximate location where the larger of the former Voris buildings was located, about 30 feet north of this excavation unit where this line of stones was. This excavation unit revealed a stone foundation remains as well. And when the unit was expanded, it was found to be the corner of a former structure. Associated 19th century artifacts found adjacent to the foundation include a mid-19th century glass bottleneck and fragments of a large American stoneware jug. Shown here, here's the base of it, and here is it partially restored. Within the foundation, some interesting artifacts were also found, including fragments of a bisque German-made doll head, several white kaolin pipe stems, fragments of medicine bottles, also ceramic fragments, whiteware, yellowware, and Rockingham, which all date from the mid-19th century, and also a graphite pencil and a clay marble. While the jug, liquor bottles, and ceramics and smoking artifacts were expected, the other recovered materials does provide some information and more about a residential life for the children that were once present on the site. and the types of toys that were available to them. In Excavation Unit 9, to the east of Excavation Unit 5, that was with the corner foundation, additional foundation remnants were uncovered in another section approximately 20 feet away. This could mean that the house was approximately 20 feet by 30 feet in size, which is on a par with the neighboring houses of that time period. This discovery will help dictate future work at the site. When we completed field work, all of the units were flagged and the site datum was reinforced so that they can be easily identified when we return to the site for additional testing. At present, my analysis of artifacts is continuing and I am working on comparing what was found in between all of the units, as well as working on looking at the consumer choices that Voris was making when purchasing the type of ceramics and glassware present. In addition, in one location, near the foundation, a completely unexpected concentration of 18th century artifacts, including slip-decorated earthenware, white salt glaze stoneware, was recovered. This was found in one of our smaller test pits and is a location that I would like to go back to for additional testing, as it is puzzling as it was almost adjacent to the foundation. The most important things about the 8 days of the initial testing at the Voris site is that we believe we have found the foundation of one of the Voris buildings, and we do know that there was a lot more to excavate and to learn about William Voris and the residents of the site from the mid-19th century. So I do have one thing that that I've been puzzling about, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on it. You know, most of us have been looking at the site as if it was the location of his saloon. He is listed as a saloon maker in several places, a saloon owner in several places, as well as a liquor retailer. So if that is the case, that I would have expected a lot more artifacts related to a saloon keeper and you know, a lot more glass bottles, a lot more jugs, not just the one or two or few that we had found on the site. So now I'm thinking more or less that he may have had a saloon at another location, and this might be his actual residential house that is here. And he did, according to the documents, have a mortgage on a saloon or something like that on Rye Beach, which is nearby. So now I'm going to it with fresh eyes to think about maybe this was clearly a domestic site and only a domestic site, and his inn or saloon was somewhere else. So the most important thing about the testing at the Voris site is that we do know that one of the buildings is there. We do know that there's a lot more to excavate and learn about William Voris and all of the residents of his household over the years. So I do want to say, I'm making this a little shorter so we can talk a little bit more and share some more thoughts. Thank you to the representatives of the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy, as well as to all of the people who came out to excavate, including Michelle, Stephanie, Jerome, Barbara, Maddie, Jessica, Kelly, David, Doug, James, Rosie, and Allison, and everyone else who came to the site to look, to watch, to volunteer, and to learn a little bit more about a part of the hidden history of Rye and its 19th century and a couple of its 19th century residents. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We actually have some comments, or someone raised their hand
Okay.
in wanting to speak to something. But before we do that, and I just wanted to see if anyone has any particular questions, because we haven't gotten any questions in the Q&A function just yet. Oh, so I'm seeing one question now. Okay, let me just read it out loud. But while we do that, Sarah, would you be open to maybe inviting the person to who has her hand raised to speak? Or Patricia, if you would be able to, would you mind typing in maybe you know, what you would like to say. I think that will also help us in facilitating this conversation, just because I think all of us here might have questions, and we just want to make sure everyone has an equal chance to ask their question and be responded to, you know. So before I pass it on to Patricia, or, you know, if you can gather your thoughts in words and type in the chat. Terrence has this question for you, Sarah, so I'm just gonna read it now. Do you have any learned deeply cultural nuances also resembling passed down African practices and traditions?
You know, I was actually looking for that. And I think that because this was such a small initial excavation, we haven't found anything like that yet. And I would love to expand and open up the foundation a lot more to see if we can find anything like that. Because, you know, I have seen that at other sites. I did not see anything here. And I'm not sure if it's because William Voris has so far beyond being, you know, being associated with his African roots, or if it's just that we haven't found it yet.
Thank you. I'm just making sure if there are any open questions. If not, then I might, let me see if I can allow Patricia to speak directly, just so she can ask her question. Okay, while that is happening, sorry, Terrence has a follow-up of whether there are passed down African practices or traditions that whether it would be recognized.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there are some things that I have seen at other places. You know, in a couple of the traditions I have seen have to do with in the doorways. There have been placements of underneath when you find the original doorway, underneath the doorway. At one site, there was some corn cobs and some other, you know, particular food remains that were placed in, wrapped up, that were placed underneath an entry into the house. That was attributed to possible African tradition. There have been other sites that I've worked on that have had a few. I can't remember all of them now. So let me think back. When we this was in Massachusetts, and what we found underneath were some remains of a chicken, actually, that was in the entry of the house, underneath, just past, not underneath the outside entry, but underneath the interior of the house, underneath the floorboards. And that was related by the head archaeologist there to possibly African traditions. So I have not seen anything like that here. Most of the materials that we have found have been the typical historic site materials that we expected to find, but nothing African yet. I'm hoping to find something.
We have another question from Terrence. He asked, any evidence of the results of oppression reflecting those times?
Any results of the what? Oppression?
Results of oppression reflecting those times.
You know, not archaeologically yet, but in reading some of the documents, you know, especially the documents where his son Henry is desperately trying to clear out his father's estate. There seems to be there seem to be some issues with people coming after him for you know, to pay certain bills off for the estate. And I as I was reading through these documents, I was wondering very much if it would it have been a little bit different if he wasn't a Black man trying to work his way through the white courts. I don't know, because I did feel that it took him a very long time. When William died, he died without a will. So, Henry tried for 5 years to clear out the estate. And with many of the documents, he showed over and over all of the things that he paid off, except there was this one individual who kept coming back and saying, well, you owe me $41. Now you owe me $92. Now and it seemed that the court kept entertaining this gentleman's suit over and over and over again. And I just don't know how much that would have been the case if it had been somebody different.
We have 2 more questions, and I think they are somewhat related, but I think just to go off of what the last question that was asked, so this is somewhat related because both questions are touching on kind of materials that are found in these sites. But then we have one question from Brand specifically asking, did you find any fiber art projects consistent with kilts, possibly involved with the Underground Railroad? And another question was speaking more to, other types of materials, like whether large quantity of oyster and clam shells found along the foundation was typical for a residence versus a saloon. But I thought the first question also is speaking to the broader historical context that Terrence was somewhat interested about as well.
Yeah, we did not find any fiber art yet. We only, hit the foundation of the house in 2 small sections, that were literally 3 feet by 4 feet in one section and 3 feet by, 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot. So we only exposed a small section of it. The point of this initial testing was to start to find and see if there was actual presence of this household there. And now that there is, this is going to lead to a lot more, excavation in the future. And I'm bound and determined to hopefully work with Anne to get that to make that happen, because I do think that there is probably more once we expose the entire foundation that is actually in there. So as far as the oyster and clamshells, yes, they were right by the shore, and that would have been a relatively inexpensive amount of, food type, seafood to get. Somewhat interesting is that looking at a lot of the clamshells, they're very similar in size. So it's interesting because when most archaeologists look at clamshells, they're all similar in size. That usually means that they were purchased at a market, which actually kind of surprised me because I think that they would just go right outside and clam right along the shore. So, but that is very typical of a residential. As a matter of fact, almost more typical of a residential than a saloon. A saloon, like I said, I would expect to have found a lot more smoking pipe stems and pipes, a lot more glass bottles, a lot more, drinking vessels and things like that, and jugs and things like that. I would expect to find a lot more of.
I'm sure you can also see in the
yes,
Q&A function. So if you want to take a jab at any of the questions, but I can also read it out loud so people on the phone can hear the question. But I think Terrence has another question just to kind of continue that conversation of the historical context. He asked, any cross historical documents out there significantly resembling or related to this project?
Not really, because I have been looking through a lot, expanding out to look at a lot more of the neighbors. Specifically, I'm also looking to see who else, I do think, looking at this, that William Voris may have been in Rye earlier than 1840. I definitely do think so. And I'm wondering, because the census until 1850 only had the head of household and then, enumerated the number of people on it, I'm thinking that he may have lived on the property and worked for somebody else, and maybe even the Homestead family that he actually ended up purchasing the land for. So that is one of the avenues I'm looking for. But there's really not a lot of other community members at the same time. Now, they were involved in the church, and there is a few references in his legal documents after he passed on to being a church member and a church, part of the church, but nothing formal about the community that he was with. The community that Voris was a part of. That's the next question, by the way. Roxy, I'm sort of jumped right over onto it. An attendee had asked about if there was any type of community the Voris were a part of, and what was his social circles like from the research. It's interesting because all of the people he seemed to have dealt with that he owed money to upon his death, or that owed money to his estate, all seemed to be part of the neighborhood, the surrounding neighbors, which were white families and not his family. But he is buried in the African American part of the cemetery. Specifically, that was used for a lot of the Civil War veterans after the Civil War, et cetera. So it's very interesting that, in life, he seemed to be a lot more involved in the larger Rye community than he was in death. We have not done any genetic or forensic testing yet. Not of any of the materials recovered. Most of that you can do on, you have to have some type of, obviously something that was once living material. That would mainly be food remains. And our food remains really have been, as Jessica had said, that we had a lot of shell. There was either oyster shell and clam shell. There were some animal remains as well, and that's mostly were calf fragments and a chicken bone. And we have not done any testing on the food remains at the site yet. We would like to get really much more done the next time that we go out there. This first foray into the site was very exciting, just for the fact that we actually found what we were looking for. We were very worried for a while that we were only going to find remnants of the 20th century and late 19th century building refuse all over the site. So it was very exciting to actually find the foundation. And now more of the heavy work begins. So one of the things that, as I said, I do think that, it would be interesting to see if we could find out where exactly on Rye Beach his property where he had a saloon actually was. And we do know carbon dating. Yes, carbon dating would be done this is Terrence again asking about carbon dating. Carbon dating can be done. Again, it has to be on something that has carbon in it, like food remains or bones from animal remains or something like that. That's what you typically do on sites. Unfortunately, with historic sites, because carbon testing, when you test it, it usually gives you a date range of 100 years, more or less. That it doesn't really pinpoint exactly what we could use for this site to double check that kind of stuff. That is more helpful when you're looking at Native American or indigenous peoples sites, and that is when you have something from the Archaic period that's 1,000 years ago, give or take 100 or give or take 50 years. It helps quite a bit with that kind of dating, but not so much with historic sites. Historic sites, the dating that we have really comes down to the historic artifacts. And those artifacts, because we know the date range of the production of historic artifacts so much, that can provide a wealth of information on the consumer choices that maybe Mr. Voris was making when he was on the site, buying these type of bottles, these types of medicines, or these types of plates. As I was saying, the choices that he was using some generic whiteware that may have been for, guests or something like that. Whereas he had also some kind of fancier, blue transfer printed whiteware plates that may have been more for his household. So there was those type of choices that you would make when you go and purchase items. And those kinds of choices he seems to have been making were similar to what his neighbors were also purchasing as well. Well, I do know that there are some possible descendants, and so that is the next step as well, is to start talking to the community that's actually there, and that is an exciting part for me. Descendant communities are sometimes the best type of evidence for what life was like, and they can provide so much details. And so that is our next step, is to do some oral histories as well.
This segues perfectly to the question that was asked in the Q&A as well, because there is someone asking, do you have any long-term plan for the site and the findings after more excavations completed, and if/how this would affect local history interpretation?
Well, I do think some it's very interesting. I mean, for Rye, you know, it would be exciting to show. I mean, here you have not only an entrepreneur who started out as a peddler and worked his way up to a business owner, that you can even see his property increasing in value as he was getting older and more established. So it would be great to be able to tie in, that kind of history together. And then somebody asked us at oral history, and oral histories. The oral histories would probably be of descendants and people who, as children, maybe they're a little bit older now, but as children may remember, people talking about the Vorises or the Bird family, who eventually took over the Voris property and may have known the Vorises in the 1870s. And maybe there's some sort of connection there that we could get some more information about and share, because after William Voris passed on and Jane did, Henry Voris was still in Rye for several years to come. So there are people that would, his descendants there perhaps that would remember. So a lot of the plans for the future, I know the Bird, Homestead, and Meeting House Conservancy has plans to do a lot of public outreach. I don't know what they want to do with the artifacts, and that's something that I'm sure that we would love to see get used for education purposes in Rye, so we can share that with students, that they're and start with children as they're younger to get them excited about their own history. I know that that's one of my goals, and so I would love to work with them on that and to share that with the local school groups and share some of the interesting things, and maybe maybe they can work with some of the artifacts if we when we go back. So Jessica asks about, do we know of any stores that existed in the area that would likely have a source? That, one of the things that I'd love to do with that is purchasing for things like that is you have to go to the local historical societies, because that would be the best place to start with, to try and find out if there are any record books. A lot of stores and places like that would have kept an inventory book or some type of debit credit book that they would have. And I know that at the Historical Society that I'm associated with, we have several for Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. So I would like to find out if Rye has something like that, because it may have Voris's purchase records inside it. If they have any of those kinds of records that are on there. If not, maybe Westchester County also has some. So it would be great to start with them and then venture out to see what's around. One of the best things to start with is to always look at maps, because maps do identify a lot of the surrounding residences. And if you expand further out, you can see along the shore where Rye Beach was, where supposedly William Voris had his, where William Voris had his saloon, and look and see where some of the stores or things like that were located. And that's a great starting point.
We have a question in the chat, and I think that also might help us in summarizing tonight's talk really well. Terrence asked, how can we follow your project? Which I think, right, it's a partnership between Sara as well as with other volunteers and dedicated people like at the Bird Homestead. So if you want to take that question.
Well, I do know that they do have a Facebook page, so look for them on Facebook. That's one of the best ways to follow what's going on with the Rye Meeting House and well, the Bird Homestead and Rye Meeting House Conservancy. They do have activities that go on there, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be back again maybe in the spring to do a little bit more testing, or maybe in the fall.
Yeah, I'm just sharing that in the chat as well, just now, the Facebook page that Sara just mentioned. Before we close out, you know, I actually have a question about the kind of community involvement in the excavation process as well. Like, you know, how has it been, you know, to have volunteers, right, like for the community themselves to be a part of the process versus, I guess, in other instances where you've noticed when it's kind of a more removed process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. This is my favorite kind of project where you have dedicated volunteers. You know, when I work on a lot of projects where you have professionals that go out there and they just sit down and work, and the excitement level is never as high as when you have people that are, you know, either learning how to do it for the first time or learning information about their own community. And, you know, we had so many visitors that just came by and stopped just to take a look at what we were doing and said, oh, I didn't realize this was here. And you know, a lot of our volunteers actually started to become almost, as I would call them, ambassadors for the site by talking to whoever came, or if somebody new was joining us for a few days, they would become the teacher as well and showing them how to do the archaeology, what we were finding, how this fits together, and a lot of the students became the teachers, and that's kind of what I like to see in community archaeology, because that's how it spreads. It's not just me standing there talking to them; it's me talking to the first wave, and that wave goes out and spreads over the community. So that's what I'd love to see.
Just want to make sure before we close out, are there any more questions, you know, any curiosities anyone has? And you'll make sure you put that in the chat or in the Q&A. But if not, I just want to thank Sara again for, you know, giving us a really engaged presentation, and for all of you audience members who've really asked amazing questions that help us, you know, dig a little deeper, pun intended, you know, into kind of our collective understanding of the William Voris site excavation. Oh, and we do have a question about whether there will be more events like this next year. So to answer your question, and I can't speak to our partner organization, but the Latimer House Museum is planning for another series of virtual talks next year. You know, we're very excited about it, and you know, we want to invite different Black historic sites to kind of have conversations like the ones that we're having now. So you know, that's very fake, unfortunately. But I promise, you know, we'll have more details. So, you know, if you want to be updated on it, please, you know, check out the newsletter link that has been shared in the chat by our intern. You know, subscribe or sign up for our newsletter, and make sure to check out the Bird Homestead Conservancy's Facebook page as well if you want to get any updates about the excavation, or, you know, just about any of their programming. So thank you all so much again, and I think we'll end it there for tonight.
Thank you,
Sara.
Thank you, Roxy.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.